Adams State College. Great stories begin here.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the third talk in the Fall 2010 ASC Faculty Lectures. This evening, I have the pleasure of introducing our Professor of Government here at Adams State College, Dr. Stephen Roberts, who's going to talk to us about the midterm elections in general, some historical perspective, as well as give us his forecast on the upcoming election, midterm election. And I feel like I should sort of preface this talk with the standard statement. The opinions you're about to hear in the following interview are not the opinions of Adams State College, but those of the interviewee only, blah, blah, blah. He's going to do his best to give us what the indicators are for what might happen next week during the elections, the midterm elections. He asks that if you have a question about some specific information on the screen, feel free to ask during the talk. If you have a more general question, it might be a longer discussion. Hold on to it. We'll have a period of questioning and answering at the end. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Dr. Stephen Roberts.
Yeah.
Thank you, Robert. I appreciate the opportunity to come back for the second time in 6 months. I promise I won't do any more of these for a while, so you can have some interesting talks. The title of my talk asks, will this election be marked by continuity or change? I don't mean by that, will the Democrats continue in power, or will the Republicans wrest power away from the Democrats? Rather, what I mean is, will the factors, the variables that typically play a major role in congressional elections continue in 2010, or will there be a change in the dynamics of congressional elections in general and midterm elections in particular? Tonight I plan to present selected data on the midterm elections. Time doesn't permit an analysis of all or even most of the variables thought to affect congressional elections. But I will examine some that I think are among the most important, that play a vital role in forecasting and explaining elections. I'll follow my presentation of the data with a prediction of outcomes for both House and Senate elections, along with general remarks on the climate and environment in which campaigns take place. Then I hope to open it up for questions that you might have, comments, and we can engage in discussion, you with me and some of you with each other, if that's okay. I will be having a cough drop on my mouth tonight because I still have a sinus infection and I smoke too much, and so I've had this cough that pops up from time to time. So before I came in here, I took several big swallows of my Vicks NyQuil, which I usually take to class with me and drink, but I didn't want to do that in front of an audience of people I don't know. You might think I have a drinking problem. And I have many problems, but that's not one of them. So let's go to, and this is Kylie Keller. She's my assistant tonight. Last April it was Jess Gallardi, and as I stated at that time, I am totally incapable of doing two things at the same time. I can't chew gum and cross the street. I can't talk and flip switches, but even if I wanted to, it's not working tonight. They ran out of batteries here. So Kylie will be moving the screens around, and she's helped me out in the past with other things, so she's a very able assistant. If we can go to table number 1, please. This is, and I'm going to spend a few minutes on this because there's a lot of important information. The left-hand side has presidential election years and columns for the year, and then House and Senate. And then on the right-hand side, we have year, House, and Senate. Going back to 1950, and what the numbers in each column tell you is how many members of the president's party won or lost seats in any particular year. So a plus means that the president's party gained seats. A negative sign means the president's party lost seats. In those years where there is a presidential, an open seat and a new president being elected, such as 1952, that would be Eisenhower. That is I got it right in front of me, plus 24. Truman was the outgoing president. The plus 24 means that Eisenhower, the Republicans gained 24 seats, okay, in the House. And they gained 2 in the Senate. So I'll talk about that a little bit more. Tonight, what we're mostly concerned about is the right-hand side, midterm election years. And midterm election years, obviously, are years in which the president is not on the ballot. But we are electing all 435 members of the Senate, the House, and roughly 1/3, 33, 34, 35, if there's been a death or an open seat in the Senate, 1/3 of the Senate will be up. But if you will look briefly at presidential election years, I think, unless you really try to read way too much into this, you won't see any sort of a pattern, either for the House or for the Senate. If you move over to midterm election years, however, and forget the Senate, because tonight I'm only doing the House. Last April, when I talked about scandals, we only did the Senate. Tonight I'm doing the House. Look at this column here. Here I'll ask for some audience participation. Does anyone see a pattern there? Dr. Crowther.
Losses, often the big ones.
Yes. In fact, only 3 times since 1934 has the president's party gained seats in a midterm election. 1934, the Democrats gained seats under Roosevelt, and then 1998, under Bill Clinton, they gained 5 seats. In 2002, George W. Bush, the Republicans gained 6 seats. Every other year, the president's party loses seats in midterm House elections. And as Dr. Crowther noted, some years it's pretty big. 1958, the Republicans lost 48 seats. 1974, the Republicans lost 48 seats. 1982, Ronald Reagan, they lost 26 seats. And of course, 1994, under Bill Clinton, Democrats lost 52 seats. Yeah.
So can those be correlated with something that we can think of in history, like in '74, that Watergate, I could see it would be disillusioned with Republicans?
Yeah.
Is that always the case? Can you pick out something? Or is that not the case?
Well, 74, yeah, Watergate played a big role. There are other factors that go into it. A lot of it has to do with how well the president's party did in previous elections. The more seats you win, the more seats you have at risk, and there's more that you could lose, right? So if one party does really well 2 years or 4 years in advance, then eventually some of those seats are going to be lost, but the fewer seats you have in Congress, you don't have that many seats to lose. So that's also another factor. And the economy, which I'm going to talk about in a minute. The economy plays a major role. Yeah.
It seems like the biggest losses are the second term of the incumbent president.
Funny you should say that. if you look right down here in this little print, and for those of you who can't see it, I'll read them off. In a president's first term, the first midterm election, the average seat loss historically is 16 seats. The second term is disastrous. In a president's second midterm election, assuming the president wins re-election, the seat loss is 31 seats. So the second midterm, historically, has tended to be the worst. Getting back to your question, Robert, in a midterm election, let's say, for the sake of argument, which is true, many people this year are upset with Obama for a whole host of reasons. But they can't vote against Obama because Obama's not on the ballot. Can't take it out on Obama. Who can they take it out on? Democrats, right? The reason the second midterm, well, one of the reasons why the second midterm would be worse than the first is you've now had this president for 6 years. And I don't know who came up with the saying, familiarity breeds contempt. But the longer you've had someone in your living room, which is what I'm referring to is somebody once, I think it was David Gergen, who's advised a number of presidents, and he we look at policy positions and all of this, and Gergen said, at some level, people vote for president based on who they would want in their living room for the next 4 years, because the president's going to be giving State of the Union addresses and interviews and this and that. And so you're seeing a lot of this person. If it's not someone you feel comfortable with, someone that you like, you're less likely to vote for them. Well, after 6 years, any president has probably found one way or another to make somebody mad about something, right? You're not liberal enough, he's too liberal, he's too conservative, whatever. So that's another factor that goes into it. Let me point out some other things. Let's start with 1982, when the Republicans lost 26 seats. Many people forget, because we've named airports after Ronald Reagan. Some people want to add to Mount Rushmore and put Ronald Reagan's face on Mount Rushmore. He's been idolized, idealized. Many people forget the first couple years weren't all that great. The economy was in hard times. In 1982, the unemployment rate was 9.7%. 1994, when the Democrats lost 52 seats, the unemployment rate was 7.5%. 2002, when Bush actually picked up 6 seats, it was at 5.8. And 2008, the end of the Bush presidency, when McCain was running as a Republican, it was 5.8. So, and the Republicans lost 19 seats, the Democrats picked up 19 seats. So if you did a graph and you tracked some economic indicator, either unemployment, net change in take-home pay, there are different indicators that economists look at, but if you trace the unemployment rate, you will see that the unemployment rate or some economic indicator follow very closely the number of seats that are lost. The worse the economy, the worse the presidential party does. Does anyone know what the unemployment rate is in the United States today? The last reports?
9.8.
It's around 9.7, 9.8, somewhere in there. What do you think? If you're a Democrat, are you optimistic? If you're a Republican, are you ecstatic? So that's something that Democrats should be concerned with. Any questions on this Any other questions? We had some good questions so far on this one before we, yeah.
You didn't fill in for 2010, don't you know?
That comes at the end to get you to stay here.
As long as you're going to commit.
If I tell you in the beginning, you'll be gone. I know. And then Kylie and I will get all the brownies and cookies. Okay, Kylie, table 2. The Republicans currently hold 179 seats in the House, the Democrats 256. For the Republicans to elect John Boehner Speaker of the House, they need a net gain of 39 seats. They need to pick up 39 seats, which isn't that high, having gone over the previous table where it was 48 and 48 and 52. So 39 is not, and if I went back further in history, you would find out that it's really not that high. There are 236 Democrats running for re-election. There are 156 Republicans running for re-election. What that means is that there are 20 open seats that the Democrats have to defend. There's no longer an incumbent. It's now an open seat. And there are 23 seats previously held by a Republican that are now open seats. So all of the power that incumbents have, they get to send out free mail, they go back to the district, they appear on television and radio and interviews, and they cut ribbons at new sites of construction, they bring back pork to the district. All the powers that incumbents have, there's no incumbent in those 43 races, right? There were 2 Democrats defeated in primaries and 2 Republicans. 12 Democrats in the House are retiring compared to 10 Republicans. This one I think is interesting, running for other office. Politicians are like people in business or even academics sometimes. They want to move up the ladder. You start out entry level, you want a promotion, you want to move your way up. It's called the opportunity ladder for political scientists. 6 Democrats are running for other office, typically governor or senator. Those are more prestigious jobs than being in the House. 11 Republicans, almost double. That's important because if these Republicans didn't think this was going to be a good year for Republicans, they'd probably keep the job they've got. Most people don't give up the job they have unless they think there's a pretty good chance they're going to get another job that they want, right? So they're ambitious enough and positive enough that they think they can win election to governor or win election to the Senate. So that's our first, second, if we look historically at midterm elections. The second piece of bad news for my Democrats in the audience. Table 3. Okay, now it gets a little more confusing. I talked about this in April. Some of you were here then, but I need to go through it again quickly by what I mean by quality and amateur candidates. In the political science literature, we categorize candidates as a dichotomous variable. Quality and amateur. And that's not a value judgment, that some have quality or good and some are bad. A quality candidate is a candidate who has run for and won some previous election. House, Senate, governor, school board, county commission, mayor of a city, doesn't matter. You've run a campaign and you've won something. We consider those candidates quality candidates. If you've never held elective political office before, you're considered an amateur candidate. The one caveat to that is that we also classify celebrities as quality challengers, movie stars, astronauts, television personalities, because they have high name recognition. Money is important in politics, but one of the biggest reasons money is important is because money buys you name recognition. It gets your name out there. Well, if you're a celebrity and you've already got high name recognition, you're already starting out, right, with quite a bit of aid, okay? And if you don't believe this, that'd be a lot of work to do. I have to take my word for it. But if you looked at 10 elections, you can draw a line down the center of the page. On this side, you put quality candidates, and this side, you put amateur candidates, and then you compute what percentage of the time do they win. You will find out that quality candidates win a lot more frequently than do amateurs. So that's why it's a useful distinction. So let's look at challengers to incumbents. There are the Democratic incumbents are facing 53 quality challengers. 23% of all Democratic incumbents have a challenger running against them who's a quality challenger, quality candidate. Republican incumbents have only 14%. The average, for my data, which goes from 1974 up to 2010, my database, the average is 19% a year. 19% of challengers to incumbents every year are quality challengers. So you'll see that Republicans are running a better crop of challengers against Democrats than Democrats are against Republicans. So that's another piece of bad news for Democrats. The last column, uncontested. There are 5 Democratic incumbents who are running for re-election where there is no Republican even on the ballot. It's uncontested. The Democrat's going to win. Okay? There are 20 Republicans running where there's not even a Democrat on the ballot. No one's running against them. It's fairly safe to assume those 20 Republicans are going to win, right? So Republicans this year have a big advantage. Ted's sweating. He doesn't like what he's hearing over here. Another reason to think this might not be a good year for Democrats. Jan?
Did you say that they have to win 37 seats or 39?
39.
Does that 20 go into that, or is that win 39 on top of
No, it's a net. They need a net gain of 39. Okay. The next one down here, district partisanship of those running by presidential vote for Democratic incumbents and Republican incumbents. One question that political science try to address is how do we determine the district partisanship of a district? How do you measure that? The most useful means is to look at the prior presidential vote in that district. You clearly don't want to look at the incumbent vote because you don't know if the incumbent vote is getting those votes because it's a Democratic or Republican district or because of the incumbent and name popularity. So you can't use that variable. So what I've done is I've looked at each district, all 435 districts. I computed the mean presidential vote for that incumbent's party. So for the Democrats, I computed the 2004 Kerry vote and the 2008 Obama vote and got a mean average. What percentage of the district voted for the Democrat? For the Republican, I computed what percentage of the district voted for Bush and McCain, the mean vote. So that's how I'm measuring district partisanship. This means that the district voted less than 50% for the Republicans. I mean, less than 50% for the Democrats, more than 50% for Republicans. 56 Democratic incumbents this year. 56 Democratic incumbents are running for re-election in districts that on average voted for Republican in presidential elections. Okay? 180 voted, 180 are defending seats where it was 50% or above. Only 14 Republicans are defending seats that on average voted Republican between 2004 and 2008. Is that optimistic news for Democrats? There's another nail in the coffin. Any question on this one before we move on to the next bit of good news? Or bad news, depending on what side of the aisle you're on. Next one, Kylie, please. Thank you. Here we get back to those darn quality and amateur candidates again. Now I'm looking at open seats. These are seats where there is no incumbent. The incumbent has retired or is running for other office. D-qual means the Democrat is a quality candidate, the Republican is an amateur. The next line would be a Democratic quality against a Republican quality, a Democratic amateur against a Republican amateur, and a Democratic amateur against a Republican quality. The two we're mostly interested in would be this row and this row. Again, these are for open seats. The 20 open seats that had been controlled by the Democrats. So these are the seats where the Democrats retiring or running for other office. Democrats have an advantage in 8 of those where they're running a quality candidate against a Republican amateur. But 3 of those, there's a Democratic amateur running against a Republican quality candidate. Okay? Here they're even. They're both running quality against quality or amateur. That's why I say these are the 2 that we're interested in. Now let's look at the 23 Republican open seats. 14 of those seats, 61% of Republicans have an advantage compared to 40% of Democrats. 14 Republican quality candidates running against Democratic amateurs. There's only 1 seat where the Republicans are running an amateur against a Democrat with quality, compared to 15% here. So again, that looks like pretty dismal news for Democrats and good news for Republicans. Open seat presidential vote. Same thing. I computed the 2004, 2008 presidential vote by party. Only now I've narrowed it, I've divided it in 4 categories rather than 2. Less than 50%, 50 to 54, 55 to 59, and 60 or more. In political science, we have this concept of what's called marginal seats as opposed to safe seats. A safe seat is a seat where the incumbent, by most measures, is safe. Okay? A marginal seat is a seat that's competitive. It's another way of looking at competitiveness. We use 2 different standards, and depending on which political scientist you talk to, you'll get one or the other. It's either 55% or 60. So that's why I put both of them on here. 10 Democrats, 10 of the 20 Democratic seats, 50%. There is no incumbent now. It's an open seat. 10 of those 20 are trying to defend seats that voted Republican in presidential elections. That's not good if you're a Democrat. Another 4 are trying to defend seats where the Democratic presidential candidates won between 50 and 54%, well within the most stringent test of marginality. It's less than 55%. So if you combine those two together, 14 out of the 20, or 70% of Democratic open seats are really marginal seats. Look at the Republicans. Only two Republican seats are seats that, on average, voted Democratic in 2004, 2008, and only 3 more of those seats did the Republican did the Republican get 50 to 54. So if you combine those two, there's 14 Democrats at risk, Democratic seats, compared to only 5 Republican open seats. That make sense? Did I explain that, right? Any questions? Okay, before we go into the last one, there are several good websites, if any of you are interested in people who charge big bucks to be a member of their website and get all of their data and all of their information. Probably the best one is Charlie Cook. If you watch many of the talk shows on television, CNN, MSNBC, Fox, you may have seen Charlie Cook. It costs like $400 a year to subscribe to his Charlie Cook report. He follows every single House race in the nation, every Senate race, every gubernatorial race. He's got field reporters. They get local polls. They talk to campaign advisors. They're on the ground. Very reliable. Another one that some of my students have heard, Larry Sabato, is one of the authors of my textbook on American government. He's at the University of Virginia. He's a congressional scholar that does similar things that Charlie Cook does. And they come out with how many seats they think are competitive this year or in any given year. And it changes by the week. I mean, if I was giving this talk, well, it couldn't be next Wednesday. It'd be the best time to give the talk, because after the election I could predict the outcomes with more certainty. But by Monday things will be different. I mean, scandals occur, things happen, although that doesn't seem to hurt certain candidates who continue to put their foot in their mouth, and if anything they go up in the polls, i.e. Sharon Engel in Nevada. Let's go to the next one. Having said that, this is Cook's latest numbers. There are 116 what he calls competitive seats. 99 of them are Democrats. 17 of them are Republican seats. That's not good news for the Democrats. And it's not good, it's very good news for Republicans. So, digesting all of this, let me close by getting away from numbers. In answering the question, continuity or change, I suggest that this midterm election will be marked by continuity. The same factors, the same variables that typically affect congressional elections will be in play this year. This year is not going to be any different than any other year. Presidential vote matters. All of these different variables that typically matter in elections matter. The economy matters like any other year, and so on. One possible exception, and I told Robert that I admit it when I'm wrong. Last April, someone from the audience, I don't think they're here tonight, but they asked me about the Tea Party. And I'm on YouTube as having said that I didn't think the Tea Party would last. I thought that it would fade. I believe I said something to the effect that it's hard to maintain that same enthusiasm and passion over a long period of time. And this is meant to give my Democrats in the audience some hope, because I was dead wrong about that. So I may be dead wrong about every other prediction I make this evening. Because the Tea Party is still around. But I don't think that makes this election different. I was presupposing that someone might say, well, you say it's going to be continuity. What about the Tea Party? Well, they go by a different name. But I think that anger, that passion, that enthusiasm would have still been here. It would have simply been Republicans. We call them Tea Party people. And the Tea Party like to tell us that we are nonpartisan. We're Democrats, Republicans, and Independents. Does anybody in this room really think that there are many Democrats who have joined the Tea Party movement? I mean, come on. As my class has heard more times than they probably care to, but one of my favorite sayings comes from Judge Judy, who wrote a book, "Don't piss on my shoes and tell me it's raining." Don't lie to me. Tea Party or Republicans. Nothing wrong with that, but just call it what it is, right? So I don't accept that the Tea Party makes this year an aberration in any meaningful way. As noted at the beginning, the president's party almost always loses seats in midterm elections. National conditions, such as the economy, create an environment in which strategic elites act and voters react. The GOP is running a substantially better crop of candidates than are Democrats. We would expect that, given what we know historically about congressional elections. Republicans have an advantage in both open seat and incumbent races. Republican incumbents face a weaker crop of challengers than do Democratic incumbents. Democrats have 6 times as many competitive seats to defend than do Republicans. This is consistent with what usually happens in midterm elections. The Democrats gained a total of 49 House seats in the 2006 midterm and the 2008 presidential elections. So between those two elections, the Democrats gained 49 new seats. Thus, they have a larger number of recently elected members who came in on a wave who must now defend those seats in a hostile environment and a rough year for Democrats. Many of these recently elected Democrats won in districts that are really either purple or red. A purple district would be competitive, a red district would be Republican. Many Democrats came in on Obama's coattails in 2008. People went in the voting booth, they voted Obama, and right down the line, they were mad at Bush, whatever. Okay? They got swept in on Obama's coattails. Well, now they have to defend that seat. And that seat frequently will go right back to where it had been before, an equilibrium. Okay? Recall the Democrats have to defend 56 seats where the mean Republican vote in the past 2 presidential elections was 50% or higher. 70% of Democratic open seats are in districts where the mean presidential vote for Democrats was less than 50%. Even though we would expect the Democrats to lose seats in the midterm, there are several reasons why this midterm will be worse than it otherwise might have been. Here, my Barack Obama fans will not be happy. I just ask that you don't throw things at me or slash my tires. As my students who were around in the summer and fall of 2008 recall, I warned that Barack Obama was an amateur and not ready for prime time. For example, Might the Senate race in Colorado be different had he not pulled a Democrat, Ken Salazar, from a purple state to serve as Secretary of the Interior? An incumbent, six-term incumbent, popular in the state of Colorado. But no, being the amateur that he is, Obama pulled a Democrat from a competitive state and brought him to Washington, D.C. And now we have an appointed fill-in Senate, quote, incumbent, Michael Bennet, who's never run and won elective office before. Who do you think would have had a better chance in this election, Ken Salazar or Michael Bennet? You have President Obama, if you're a Democrat, to thank for that. Or I guess I should say, if you're a Republican, you have President Obama to thank for that. He also made the foolish mistake of actually thinking that he had won a mandate. And here I hope that my history colleagues, Professors Loosbrock and Crowther, will agree with me. There aren't such things as mandates usually. In elections, the politicians frequently think they have one. There are many reasons for Obama's election victory. Bush fatigue. We get tired of presidents and that president's party after 8 years. If you look at the cycle, it's interrupted in history, but we'll frequently have 8 years of Democrats and 8 years of Republicans and so on, okay? We get tired, we want to change. That's part of it. Opposition to our continued presence in Iraq, in Afghanistan, a desire to change party control of the White House. Obama is a good public speaker. And I could go on and on and on. 140 million Americans voted in the 2008 presidential election. The media loves to take 240 million, I keep saying 240 million, 140 million votes and collapse them down into, this is the meaning of the election. This is what the election meant. And presidents are governors, executives who win elections and think they have a mandate, and then they go out and they do all sorts of things because their advisors are telling them, oh, you were elected to do this and do that. And it's an invitation to disaster. And I think we're seeing it again. There was also exceptionally high voter turnout by African Americans and 18 to 24-year-olds in 2004. Is Travis here tonight? No, I asked my American government class this morning how many of them were going to vote, and only about 25% to 30% of the hands went up. They're not going to turn out and vote in midterm elections. Historically, they don't. Obama's not on the ballot. The excitement is over. But he did not receive a mandate for massive new federal programs in so many areas of life. And I know that many in the room probably support all of Obama's programs. I'm not challenging whether the programs are desirable or undesirable. That's another talk we can do. I look at this as a political pragmatist. Politics is about winning elections. If you happen to come up with good policies in the meantime, that's icing on the cake. But it's about winning elections. Call me Machiavelli, if you will. Obama's first priority, second priority, and third priority should have been the economy. Not a year-long bloody and messy fight over health care. Then he proceeded the fight in full public view, striking deals with conservative Democrats in the Senate in order to gain votes. And we saw this. Oh, Ben Nelson, he may not vote for health care. Well, here, we'll give you a couple $100 million for pork, Ben. Mary Landrieu in Louisiana, she may not vote for health care. Oh, we'll give her a couple $100 million. This was in full view of the American public. Everyone saw this. He came across not as the candidate of change that you can believe in, but as just one more deal-making, big government deficit spending Democrat. His Wall Street bailout at the expense of smaller local banks was unpopular. His partial takeover of the auto industry was unpopular. Obama recruited Pelosi and Reid to lean on all Democrats in both houses to support his health care and bailout plans. This included Democrats from marginal seats, red districts or purple districts or states. These are Democrats who are basically blue dog conservative Democrats who are representing districts or states that are primarily conservative states. The only way they can stay into office is to not veer too far to the left. But Obama wanted his plans, and so they twisted arms, and they got Democrats to go on record as supporting policies that the people back home didn't want. Rather than give these at-risk members maneuvering room to save their seats, he was more concerned with his programs than he was with continued Democratic control of Congress. Obama can give a good speech with catchy but vacuous phrases like "yes, we can" and "change you can believe in," but he's dismally ineffective as a party leader. I predicted in the fall of 2008 that not only will Obama be a one-term president, but he'll do serious damage to the Democrats in Congress and the Democratic image in general. Tonight, I project the second part of that prediction will come true this year. My projections are consistent with that of Charlie Cook, Larry Sabato, and others. Numbers are a little different, but in the same ballpark. The Democrats will lose control of the House. The Republicans need to pick up 39 seats to take control. I project the Republicans will gain 50 seats in the House of Representatives. In the Senate, the Republicans need to pick up 10 seats. I project that they'll get 7 or 8. But for those of you who want to watch the returns next Tuesday night, I'll give you a little clue of something to look for. Look at Connecticut and West Virginia. They'll be two of the earliest states reporting. They're both on the East Coast. If the Republicans somehow win both Connecticut and West Virginia, the Senate races, if you're a Democrat, you may as well turn out the lights and go to sleep, because the rest of the evening is going to be really, really bad. If the Democrats hold on to both of those seats, then it'll be extremely difficult for Republicans to take over the Senate, because they pretty much have to win every other Senate race, which is very unlikely. So West Virginia and Connecticut are crucial. All of this has implications for governing, of course. Elections are only important because they put into office those people who are going to pass laws, presidents who will veto laws, policies, tax rates, whether we go to war or not. That's why elections are important. They give us our government. With Republicans in control of one or both chambers, Obama will be forced to move to the center or risk becoming irrelevant. Bill Clinton had the political savvy to do just that. He moved to the center. As much as he personally disliked Newt Gingrich, and as much as he was at odds with the Republicans, he engaged in the catchy term triangulation. He moved to the center. I'm not sure that Obama will do so. In any event, Obama will have only about 6 months to achieve anything. After that, the 2012 presidential race will kick in, and he'll have very little opportunity to score any achievements that he can campaign on in 2012, because Republicans will be in no mood whatsoever to work with him, because they are planning for the 2012 presidential elections. Then I think the first half of my prediction that Obama will be a one-term president will come true. Now that I've angered and depressed the Democrats in the audience and pleased the Republicans, I'd like to hear from you for your questions, comments. Thank you. I thought you had to leave at 7:45. I'm just kidding, Ted. I was expecting the tough. I was expecting Ted's hand to be up. Yeah.
I have a question. What do you think would have happened if Mr. Clinton had,
Hillary Clinton?
Hillary Clinton had won the presidential?
I think Democrats this year would be in much better shape than they are under Obama.
I think so too.
Yeah.
Would you like to give us some predictions of who you think will run in 2012 for each
President? For president?
Yes.
Well, sadly, incumbent presidents usually aren't denied the nomination for a second term, so the Democrat will be Obama. So I guess you're really asking about Republicans, and so much can happen in, I mean, 2 weeks is a lifetime in politics, let alone 2 years, but I'd say right now the favorite would probably be Mitt Romney. But
they've got to sort of bring someone forward in the next, 6 months?
oh no,
They can leave it later than that?
no, yeah. 2011 will be the crucial year. As a general rule, and this doesn't apply across the board, but if you want to find out who the odds-on favorite would be to win the Republican nomination, check the last filing date on the FEC Federal Election Committee, who's raised the most money. Whichever Republicans raised the most money as of December 31st, 2011, that would be the Vegas favorite. Now, the favorite doesn't always win, as those of us who've been on football know, but that's historically the trend. Thank you for coming, Ted. Oh, you have a question? I'm sorry.
Last night, well, a comment. Last night I went to, at 5:30 I went to Calvillo's where the Democrats were having their big celebration. And at 6 o'clock I came over to Luther Bean where the Republicans were meeting. Calvillo's upstairs was packed to standing room only all around the room. The Republicans had maybe between 40 and 50 people there. And I thought, this must be a measure of the enthusiasm around here. But after listening to this, I think the Republicans already know what's going on. They say, we don't need to go eat pizza when Calvillo's is serving a full meal.
There you go.
Free.
It could have just been the food and nothing
One
else.
other quick comment, if I may. I don't attribute the probable pending loss of the Democratic Senate seat to Obama, who picked somebody he thought would be a good Interior Secretary, and I'll concede that. But I blame Ritter, who had an opportunity to appoint a Latina. I don't remember her name, but she's very big in the Metro Block area, very popular among Republicans and Democrats alike, who's been in the Colorado State Senate for a while, long enough to have a reputation. And that would have been a twofer, a Latina to replace Salazar, and instead he chose this weenie, Bennett.
And actually,
Excited about that.
Thank you.
Thanks, great talk.
just so you know, Salazar was upset that Bennett was changed.
Were they? I think a lot of Democrats were. Yes?
But I think it's
Yeah.
naivete on the part of Ritter.
Yeah. Well, I would argue I disagree with Ted, which is fine, but I think it was more of a amateurish political move to both Salazar the Senate. I mean, you would not see a Republican president do that.
Well, Bill Clinton did the same thing with the 3rd Congressional District. African American that my father actually voted for.
Oh,
Mike Espy.
Yeah, yeah.
And of course, his political career ended, and now that district is in the hands of the other party.
Right. I mean, it's just not good politics, and out of a nation of what, 300 million, there had to be other qualified people who could have run the Interior Department without pulling a Democrat out of a purple state. So I do lay that one directly on the doorstep of Obama. I saw some other hands back there. Yeah.
You mentioned money a
Yeah.
moment ago. A couple of weeks ago, David Brooks wrote that piece in the New York Times on how unimportant money was in elections, and he's been pushing this on NPR and also on the Lair Show ever since. Would you care to comment on that?
Well, that's absurd.
Okay.
Money is critically important in politics. I don't present any financial numbers tonight because at the time I was working this data up, they would not have been complete because candidates spend a large chunk of their money the last 2 or 3 weeks of the election. So what the financial figures were a month ago really wouldn't help us that much. But I think if you look at California, for instance, who's the Republican gubernatorial candidate in California? No, she's
Whitman.
Whitman. Anybody, if you know this,
eBay.
don't say it.
Oh,
How much money has she spent of her own?
140 million.
140 million of her own money. It's a new record. Yeah, and Free Arena's spending a lot of money too. So money's very important. But in Senate and House races, again, if you draw that line down the center and you don't put names or parties, you just put numbers. How much did this candidate spend? How much did that candidate spend? And you will find that money, in fact, really does matter. But while we're on the topic of money, I was talking to one of my colleagues at school today, and the Democrats on MSNBC and anywhere they can get a microphone in front of them and whining and crying these last couple of weeks about all the money the Republicans are spending and it's not fair and they're bringing in all this corporate money and poor Democrats. Well, number one, if you look at candidate expenditures from donations, contributions, how much money the candidates spent on their own, and soft money, right, where you're not giving it to the candidate, but you're giving it to a party who then runs ads, it's called soft money. The Democrats this year are outspending Republicans. And I didn't hear too many of my Democratic friends back in 2008 when Barack Obama refused to accept public funding because he could raise a lot more on his own, and he seriously outspent John McCain. I didn't hear anybody on MSNBC or CNN or any of my Democratic friends, oh, that's not fair. Barack shouldn't be able to spend more than John McCain. They thought it was great that the Democrats were getting all this money. So I think that some of the Democratic crying foul is a bit disingenuous, if not outright hypocritical. Yeah.
You want to take a stab at governor while you're here?
Would I like to stab a governor?
Yeah, besides that.
Yeah.
What do you think?
No, I wouldn't predict that race.
You what?
I wouldn't predict that race.
No?
No, it's too close. I will tell you that your next senator's first name's going to be Ken. I'll predict that one. Salazar, this district is in the competitive districts. Could go either way, which to me means, and those of you who have seen polls who might want to disagree with me, I would just a little bit of information that when you see polls that say in Pennsylvania the Democrat is only 2 points behind Toomey the Republican, for instance, what that really probably means is he's, besides the margin of error, because all polls can be off depending on how many people were in the sample. Typically it's 3 or 4%. It could be off one way or the other. But it's about turnout, and these polls are asking eligible voters, if the election were today, how would you vote? What we want to know is, how would those likely voters vote? Because the election is going to be determined by people who actually turn out, not just people who are eligible. And Democratic turnout is not going to be very good this year for some of the reasons that I've listed. So it'll probably be Democrats are probably polling 3 to 4 to 5% lower than these polls are showing. So for a Democrat to really have a good lead, they should have probably about a 7 or 8 or 9 point lead. 2 or 3 point lead means they might actually be not just a little bit behind, but fairly behind. Yeah, you had a...
Yeah, you had mentioned that, if the Republicans, of course, gain control here, that Obama would have to move to the center.
Mhm.
It seems to me he has been at the center all along. That has been some of the problem. Is that one of your criticisms?
I wouldn't say he's been at the center. No, I think I'm sure that many, what I would call, and I don't mean this in a bad way, just a descriptive way, but those Democrats who are to the far left, MoveOn.org people, they see Obama as in the center, but for the nation, then, I mean, I'm sorry to break the news to some of my liberal students and faculty here, but America is center-right. I mean, we are. We're more conservative than we are liberal. That's where the nation is. Even when they elected Obama in 2008, that didn't mean that suddenly the nation moved far to the left. They were still where they were before. They just had particular gripes with Bush. So how would you say, I'm open to being persuaded that I'm wrong. How would you say he's in the center?
Well, I felt he pushed more for a bipartisan vote on everything than he should have.
Right.
If he was voting for such out-of-the-way legislation,
Okay.
he would have had to have been more aggressive to begin with.
Okay.
And he didn't seem to be.
I see what you're saying. I don't think that means he's governing from the center. I think he was trying to appease those who elected him because he was going to be for change and bipartisan. And so he was trying to show the public. And so he spent, as I said, a year, a messy, ugly, bloody year, trying to find one Republican in the Senate who would join on, instead of being a pragmatic, Machiavellian politician and just doing it. He wasted a lot of important political capital. He came across like just one more politician in public, in full view of anybody who watches the news or reads the magazines. So I think it was more a function of, I mean, taking over the part of the auto industry is pretty major. I think a lot of his national health care is a pretty major sort of a thing. I wouldn't call that middle of the road, but I see where you're...
He wasn't aggressive with the push, even though he
Right.
took on the big.
All right. What else? Yeah.
On your hypothesis that the polls are overestimating
Uh-huh.
Democratic strength, I've read a little bit about a counter hypothesis that the polls are underestimating the Democratic strength because they've fallen into the old literary digest trap and are using, what do we call them these days? Old-fashioned telephones at a time when many of the potential voters have
Right.
had their telephones disconnected.
Right. And I've heard that criticism. And we just don't know because cell phones have really only been such a dominant means of communication for a fairly short period of time. There are studies on both sides of the issue. Some studies have shown that, yeah, we're missing a lot of people who have cell phones only. But then the question are the people who have cell phones rather than landline phones significantly different than people who have landline phones only? If they are, then that furthers your point. If they're not significantly different, I mean, it's kind of like a lot of people say we need higher voter turnout. If turnout would have been higher, the election would have been different. And studies reputable studies by political scientists have been done showing that if all the non-voters voted, but they voted at the same, well, not if they all voted, but if groups all voted at the same rate and in the same direction as the voters, it would not have tipped any presidential elections that we've had. So I'm not disputing what you say, I just don't think the verdict is in yet on if that is a serious criticism of polls. It could turn out to be that way. Yeah.
I just wanted to ask you about something that you said, or I'm not sure if I understood. When Ken Salazar got polled to be the Secretary of Interior, and you said he was a sixth, not he, but a sixth-term incumbent, did you mean that Senate seat had been Democratic for six, or did you say
I don't think I
that?
said,
Oh.
if I did, that was a mistake.
He said 6 terms.
Oh, I'm sorry, what I was referring to is he was an incumbent who had served 6 years.
Oh, 6 years.
Unlike Bennett,
Okay, I
who's
thought
an
maybe you meant
incumbent,
that seat.
but he's only been in office for 2 years, so he hasn't had as much time to cultivate support and use the, if I misspoke, then
Okay.
I apologize. Yeah, Gabrielle.
Well, for the sake of argument, let's say that let's say 60, 61, and 101 were passed 2 years ago, and that Colorado was a third world country now. Would the congressional election in Colorado change based on the short memory of electors in the state of Colorado? Would it become more Republican or more Democratic?
I haven't taken comparative politics and ages. Do we still refer to them as third world? I thought that was like out of the vocabulary. It's kind of underdeveloped. Okay, that clears everything up.
I'm not that liberal.
So if we were, oh, I see what, okay. So had we passed 60, 61, and 101 2 years ago,
We would blame it on the people would blame it on, the senator or the congressman. They're not bringing enough money in. They would forget that they voted yes on 60, 61, and 101.
yeah.
Would it change?
Well, I'm not sure. Maybe you can help me out in the audience. I'm not, is 60, 61, and 101 a partisan issue? I mean, are Republicans supporting it and Democrats opposing it? 'Cause I'm under the impression that even a lot of Republicans are against it.
All communities in the councilors and so on, for the city, for all cities, that it's a rural issue mostly because they depend on the monies that they give them, and they don't want it to pass the 60, 61, and 101.
Okay.
And then it goes in line with some of the statements made by some of the politicians that are on the Republican side that they want certain, what do you call it, funds cut, taxes cut.
But they're not necessarily
property
supporting,
taxes cut, all that stuff.
but they're not
They're supposed to bring
necessarily
money
supporting
to
60 or
the-
61 or
yeah,
101.
They're supposed to bring money to the cities and so on, the communities. And that's why I think it's kind of like a political, party type of an issue a little bit.
Okay. Is that your impression, Kylie? You've done a lot of study on 60, 61.
There is some favoritism, but for the most part.
I mean, there are some Republicans who are against it too, though, aren't there? Because I was reading the other day that some newspapers in the state are traditionally Republican newspapers have come out strongly against 66. So I don't think it's a straight partisan vote, so I don't know that that would have had a whole lot of difference in congressional election.
I forgot my chicken tonight to give you to barter,
Oh, okay.
thanking you to come tonight to the.
The reference to Sharon Engel and her plan for healthcare is you barter with your physician? Yes.
Well, Stephen, since you're a scholar of politics, I'm just trying to ascertain if you're actually fit as an office holder, so I'd like to know if you've ever been or you are now currently a practicing witch.
I'm glad the way that question went, because you had me worried there for a minute. No, I can honestly say, I could swear on my mother's grave, I'm not a practicing witch. Nor have I ever been a witch, or a member of any witches club or
But
party.
that's just what you would say anyway.
But are you setting up a lottery to get on that outcome?
No.
You know, I think his anti-Wicca stand is offensive.
Probably to some. Anything else, David? Did you have one?
Well, let me ask you this. I mean, you make it seem almost as if these sort of macro factors like the economy, the number of seats that are up for grabs and so on, almost totally determine the outcome, right? Is there any room for something unexpected to happen here, or is it just unemployment's 9.8%, they're gonna lose X number of seats?
Well,
Is it really that cut and dry?
I mean, clearly, the old adage is true that all politics is local, but to a large extent, local politics are set in a larger macro environment. And so, yeah, in any particular race, you could have a particularly charismatic Democrat who has really done a good job of taking care of the people back home, comes back home every weekend, you know, does good things. The Republican is an idiot. So yeah, at the micro level, some Democrats will do quite well. Most incumbents will do quite well. I mean, even in 1994, when the Democrats picked up 52, Democrats lost 52 seats, which is huge. Still, if you put it in context, about 95% of all incumbents won. And about 60% of those won with more than 70% of the votes. So most incumbents this year are going to be reelected by wide margins. We're only talking about, you know, a small sub.
Now that you mention that, wasn't it 5 years ago or maybe a decade ago that the idea was that redistricting was going to reduce the number of competitive seats to the extent that you wouldn't see these wild swings anymore? What happened to that? I mean, you know, districts have been, the lines have been redrawn in such ways that more and more districts would be solidly Republican or solidly Democrat, and there'd be comparatively few.
Well, and there are.
But we're still having a 50-seat swing, right?
Yeah, but there, out of 435 seats, there's only 116 that are listed as competitive, right? So that's still like only a quarter, and this is not your typical year. I mean, the economy, 9.6 or 7% unemployment, a very unpopular president, corruption on Wall Street. I mean, there's just a lot of stuff going on this year. So even seats that typically would have been relatively safe, what constitutes a safe seat is different this year. I suspect that this year, the number of incumbents who won with more than 60% of the vote 2 years ago, a larger number of them will be defeated this year than in the past. The swing will be much broader this year. Typically, if you won that many, if you won by 60%, if you won 60% 2 years ago, you're probably going to be safe this year, but there's so much anger out there, and the Tea Party Republicans are so energized, and Democrats are just lethargic. Many on the left are not going to turn out because they think Obama's not liberal enough. 18 to 24-year-olds are going to go back to the dismal turnout figures that they historically have had. The turnout amongst African Americans is going to be lower because I think a lot of that in 2008 was because of Obama on the ballot. He's not going to be a ballot this year. So I think the swing is going to be much broader. But speaking of redistricting, in some ways, that might be the most important thing to come out of these midterm elections, because we're going into a new decade. And who gets elected this year, right, in governor's races, state House of Representatives, state senators, which most of you aren't paying a whole lot of attention to, probably. But in some ways, those are even more important because they're going to be the ones who are going to be drawing the lines for the decade of 2011 to 2020. And they're going to be drawing these lines, and believe me, Republicans aren't going to be particularly kind to incumbent Democrats. Incumbent Democrats are going to find themselves having to defend their seats in massively redrawn districts that are not going to work out well for the Democrats. So thanks for bringing that up. Yeah.
A few years ago, there was a lot of talk about various ways to bring about nonpartisan redistricting.
Yeah.
I haven't heard a word about that now for months. Is that dead?
Well, do you think it's a good idea?
Yeah, I think I do.
Okay. How
Don't
would you
ask
do
me
it?
why.
How would you do it? How do you take, I mean, that just sounds to me like saying we need to stop putting liberal or conservative or Democrat or Republican judges on the Supreme Court. We need to put, how do you do that? How can you be nonpartisan when you're drawing partisan lines? Drawing lines is by its very nature a political act. That's what it is. So how would you, who would do it?
I do think you probably could make it less flagrant. I'm a Californian, and I always remember when the Democrats redistricted in California 50 years ago or
In
whatever.
the 70s, wasn't
They
it?
made one district that stretched all the way from Santa Barbara to San Francisco.
Yeah.
So that included virtually all the Republicans
Right,
in that part of the state.
right. That was the late 60s, early 70s with, I forget who the speaker was. There were two of them. They were brothers. One was in the Senate, one was in the House. I forget their names. I just don't know how you do it. And being a political science person and a political junkie, I like partisan politics. There's nothing wrong with partisan politics. You know, it's kind of like to use a sports example. I like the New England Patriots, and a few years ago when they had this great year, they won 17 games in a row, and they were scoring like 40, 50 points every game, and critics were saying, they're running up the score. They shouldn't keep trying to score when they've got the game in hand. Then stop them. Stop them. If you don't like the way Republicans draw lines, then elect the Democrats to draw lines. I mean, stop them. So I like politics. I think politics is good stuff, but then I study it, so I've got a vested interest in making sure, yeah.
How would you account for some of the Tea Party candidates who would be labeled as amateur, but they're still real tight in the polls with quality Democrats?
Turnout. There are people turned out. There are people turned out when their parties had primaries or caucuses. Politics is about mobilization. Politics is about getting out the vote. And the further that we've gotten away from what I consider to be the good old days of political machines, Dick Daley in Chicago and other, that's what they used to do, turnout. I was at a conference once, and the keynote speaker was Michael Dukakis, and he made the point that whichever party finally gets it, that it's not about advertising on television and radio and this and that, it's going door to door, shaking hands with people, touching people, that human touch, showing particular attention. Will you get out and vote for me, Sam? Instead of relying everything on the media, whichever party gets back to that is going to do very well. And I think we see that with the Tea Party, that they turn out and vote. Other people are like, well, I got class tomorrow, I can't turn out and vote. Oh, it's going to be cold tomorrow. The weather says it may snow tomorrow. Mobilize. Get out and vote. And the Tea Party's been very, very, very good at that. And that's why they have, in many cases, defeated the Republican choice. I mean, how many states? Joe Miller from Alaska, Engel in Nevada, O'Donnell in Delaware. I mean, it's a long list of Tea Party people who went against the wisdom of the Republican officials. Yeah, Erica.
But are they large enough to defeat the Democrats? I was watching the news and it was saying at one point that the Tea Party may actually be beneficial to the Democrats because where they might, that in the end, they won't be large enough to
Win the general
yeah,
election?
to win the general election.
Well, all the polls show, with the exception of O'Donnell, who's just, I mean, she gives new meaning to the word amateur. But Engel, last time I looked, most recent polls have her either ahead of Reed or they're in a neck-and-neck tie. Miller's ahead in Alaska. So I don't think that's going to be the case. I think these Tea Party people, once they're elected, could inadvertently help the Democrats because I think they are going to be a real pain in the butt to Mitch McConnell and Speaker Boehner, because these Tea Party people may just go their own way and say, just as you suggested that Obama has been a centrist, they may think that the National Republican Party is too liberal or not conservative enough, and they may go off the deep end in Congress, which could help Democrats in 2012 a little bit. But as far as winning a general election, want to call it? Okay. Ted has one more. I don't want to.
One more. Okay. When we got out in the lobby, Judy said, Ted, you made it sound like you're going to vote against Bennett. And I want to clarify that. We went over to the theater to see the play, and I said, I'm going back. I need to go back and clarify. And besides, I wanted to hear more of what you all had to say. The other thing about Ritter that made me unhappy, he could have had this Latina that he could have appointed, or Romanov, who I happen to support until last week. And I'm very pissed at Obama, who came within a month to endorse Bennett before the Democrats decided who their primary candidate was. My problem with Ken Buck, with whom I would really rather go have a beer than with Bennett, is that he's anti-choice for women regarding rape and incest, and I find that totally beyond the pale. And last week, my last annoyance with Bennett, I've got a yard sign in my yard that he's a weenie. They asked, what do you think about same-sex marriage? And Buck, to his credit, said, I'm totally opposed to it. Marriage is a man and a woman. I don't agree with that. Bennett did not answer the question. He said, that's not a federal matter. It's not a matter for the United States Senate, which I thought was a totally disingenuous, weenie response. Thank you.
Let's thank our speaker one more time.
Adams State College. Great stories begin here.